So I thought we would do one more proof here from 7.3. This is from, I believe it's number 12. And at any rate, we always want to look at the conclusion first and find it in the premises. A is our predicate. A is right there. So, it'll come out of there eventually. But just remember, once you've found your conclusion in the premises, your first motivation should be to get the premises to work together. Ask yourself, can I use one of the rules of inference to get, in this case, these two premises to work together? Well, what we're looking at here is P horseshoe Q in the first premise, and then this down here in the second premise is kind of like tilde P, or sorry, tilde Q, that is. Not exactly, because the tilde is on the wrong side, and of course the quantifier needs to be changed. But we know through the quantifier negation rules that we can change the quantifier and at the same time we're changing that quantifier, we're moving the tilde over. And so we end up with this here on line 3. And so now looking at 1 and 3 here, P horseshoe Q, and this is definitely tilde Q. That is the setup for modus tollens. And so we get all of this, that is tilde P in this case, by modus tollens, right? And so that's good, right? We can feel like we accomplished something. Please understand that I'm not doing modus tollens here because I have some grand secret scheme to get to the conclusion. I'm simply doing modus tollens because it works, because it's one of the rules of inference. It gets me something to work with, and hopefully will get me that much closer to the conclusion. So once we get this, right, we know we're trying to get A out of here. So we're going to have to boil this down a little bit, break this down a little bit. But note, we cannot remove the quantifier here from line 4 because the tilde is in the way. So we'll have to move it out of the way, which will enable us to maybe break that down a little further. But we've done this before. So we move the tilde to the other side, which of course changes the quantifier using the quantifier negation rules here on line 4. So we end up with this, right? Can we break this down? Well, yes, we can, because the main operator is the quantifier. And so we can do, in this case, universal instantiation. Whoops. There we go, universal instantiation of 5. Now, I'm not done because I have to choose a letter here for universal instantiation, my lowercase letter. And again, that can be any lowercase letter, but we want to think about what should we choose, a variable or an individual constant. Now, going back to the conclusion here, we do have an existential quantifier, but note that the main operator of the conclusion is actually a tilde. So this is more or less equivalent to a universal quantifier with the tilde being on the other side. Basically, another rule of thumb here in terms of helping you to decide what letter to choose here when you do universal instantiation is if there aren't any individual constants in this problem at all, it's probably best to choose a variable. So I will just choose x's there, and we'll see what happens. So obviously, though, I know that I need to get the A by itself. I'm going to have to break line 6 down even further. But the good news is here, at least for me, is that I have tildes and wedges. And anytime you have tildes and wedges or tildes and dots, right, you know to use De Morgan's lots and lots. And so I'm going to try that. And so De Morgan's on 6 gets me this. And what do you know? I can break that down fairly easily even further because the main operator of line 7 is the dot. That's simply a matter of simplification. And I'll go ahead and pop up here for number 9. So I have my A by itself. I need to end up with a quantifier on it, obviously. So what quantifier can we add to this? Well, of course, we could add either the existential or the universal quantifier because we have a variable here. However, whatever quantifier or whichever quantifier we add to line 8 will have to be added to the far left. So it won't end up looking like our conclusion here. So we know that when we add on a quantifier, we're going to end up wanting to move the tilde over, which will mean that we're going to end up changing the quantifier. So rather than adding the existential quantifier as our initial move there, we actually want to add the universal quantifier, because now this isn't our conclusion, but once we move the tilde over, we end up with our conclusion right there, right? So that's just a little trick there. Make sure you're having some idea as to where you want to land to eventually get your conclusion, and you'll be in good stead here to complete this correctly, all right? So obviously lots more problems to do here, lots more proofs to do in section 7.3. Do as many as you possibly can. That's going to make all the difference on the last exam. And so in the next section here in 7.4, we're just going to be adding to the mix conditional and indirect proof to proofs in predicate logic. The good news is that the learning curve is not very steep. We're just going to add a couple new bits of information, but mostly the process works the same. And so hopefully it won't be too difficult when we get to 7.4 in the next section.